Listening to the Normal Network. Live from Portland, Oregon, it's time for A Different View, a lively women's roundtable discussion on marijuana issues, brought to you in part by the Normal Women's Alliance, with Portland Dispensary's examiner Jennifer Alexander, Alternative Medical Choices founder Iva Cunningham, and Moms for Marijuana founder Sarah Frank. Now, here's A Different View.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to A Different View. I'm Iva Cunningham, and I've got Sarah Frank and Jennifer Alexander in the studio, and a little bit of Russ Belville over there on the, whatever that big fancy thing is over there.
The engineer's chair.
The engineer's, the captain's chair.
There you go.
We've got some great guests tonight. I am really looking forward to tonight's show. We've got Alison Holcomb, who's the I-502 chief petitioner, helped write the language.
Which is the Washington's
legalization bill. Thank you.
We're voting on in Washington.
Well, we're not.
In November. Well, we're from Oregon.
True.
But we, as
the Washingtonians are.
Yes.
And it's interesting. There's some controversy. We had a couple of weeks ago, Don Skacke, excuse me, on the show, and he's for patients against 502.
Yes.
But he's also for Sensible Washington, I believe.
He worked with Sensible Washington in the past, and they have a new initiative out, and I don't want to say what it's called incorrectly, but I think it's the Protection of Children Act or something like that. It's a newer initiative that they're coming out with that they're trying to counter 502 with. I don't know the details, and like I said, I don't want to misspeak on it, but they feel that I-502 is negative progression and not positive progression.
Well, and that's all subject to the interpreter, I think, and each of us, when we come to the voting booth, we vote our own best interests, I believe.
Yeah. So we're going to have Alison here to talk a little bit about the other side of that equation, and I think that's great. I think you should evaluate both the pros and cons, and I think all initiatives that are presented are going to have some cons, some more than others, but I think it's strategy, and we want to hear a little bit about her strategy.
I think the part we want to focus on the most is, that they're both progression. There's, Progress is what we're shooting for, and I think whether it's and not prohibition.
I was going to say, I think we said it last week, that the key is to end prohibition, period. And all the details that come after that are a part of the conversation.
Right.
But the question is, prohibition or not?
Right. Right, exactly. And I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation. We're going to take a quick break, and then we will be right back. And
talk a little bit.
Yeah. I'll see you in a minute. Thanks for listening.
Tried to make it my way. Day after day, I sit in my room and play. Day after day, I tried to make it my way, my way, my way. All my life, singing and shouting, never ever doubting you.
Offers healthcare the way it should be. Easy to access, patient-centered, team-based, and quality-focused. We offer a variety of natural, affordable healthcare treatment options like primary care, group acupuncture, massage, and assistance with OMP registration. As a patient, you will have a team of experts working with you to make you the best you can be. Call Alternative Medical Choices at 503-288-5579 or check us out on the web at altmedchoices.com.
There's always stress in the studio right before we go. You'd come back. Well, you're listening to A Different View. I'm Iva Cunningham. I've got Sarah Frank, Moms for Marijuana, and Jennifer Alexander, and activist extraordinaire, writer, blogger. I'd call you a blogger, although you don't have your own blog.
I just talk.
You just talk. Yeah.
Wherever I can.
Well, I had an interesting morning today. I was interviewed by the Oregonian, and it was a long interview. I always love to...
Not just an Oregonian, but the state's largest newspaper.
Yes, the Oregonian.
The Oregonian.
People are listening internationally. They might not know what
like,
the Oregonian is.
Some guy called
there's some guy. He's the Oregonian.
I do that a lot. You guys,
the one and only, the all-natural Oregonian.
If you lived in my head. There's other people that answer me there. Anyway, so it was an interesting interview, but the journalist that was interviewing me, this story is mostly going to be about dispensaries and safe access, and and I use that word dispensary because I think the word is perfect at explaining what those things are. In Oregon we have different words for that. There's farmers market. There's that because we can't really call it that.
Well, I was going to say
illegal.
That point right there drives me nuts. There is no law, none, not a single one, against dispensaries. There's no such thing. Wait. Any pharmacy is a dispensary.
I agree.
It's just to dispense. It's a verb
right.
that's created into a thing, and we have no laws against this. But the police run around and they say dispensaries are illegal,
right?
And so we call them something else like that. Changes
right.
it. The laws don't actually outlaw dispensaries. There is no such thing.
Well, I know. I don't disagree.
Right? Sales of marijuana
right.
is illegal.
Right. And
production of marijuana
and I think that's
is
what
illegal.
Just like some words have take on meanings as they're used or not used. But
the law doesn't work that way.
Right. However,
the law very clearly defines what a word means, and until we change that law, it very clearly means
well,
this
I
this.
don't disagree with you. I'm just saying that's why people are motivated not to say that. And it is silly. But anyway, going back to what I was talking about.
The article on dispensaries.
Right. Anyway, so she, it's about patient access and having safe access. And in Oregon, we don't have technically legal dispensaries.
Right.
But there are a lot of brave individuals, and I call them activists and individuals, that have opened up a brick and mortar store or location or facility, whatever you want to call it, to provide not just medicine, but safe medicine. So it means there's less people going to the black market, the unregulated market. But they also dispense information.
Right.
Education. Compassion. A place to converse and socialize as a support group. Mm-hmm. Sometimes people vilify the smoking rooms, but sometimes that's the only support group you've got.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's amazing. I mean, and I point this out a lot, but the people that are deeply involved in the medical marijuana movement in Oregon in particular, but in any state, only the most involved have a complete understanding of what the laws are. True. And so this idea that everything is so cut and dry, that there's just some handbook and you just did it. The laws aren't that simple. So being able to connect and discuss all the different having that information is very important.
Well, it is, and I think the more educated patients are, the more educated that individuals are, the more progress we make. And with that interview today, that's truly what I try to do. And I was trying to explain to her that not, she went into that old do you think that voters wanted that many people, in the program? That's what they intended. And I said, thousands of people will benefit, not hundreds. Thousands of people will benefit from this. And that's
the language from the voters' pamphlet guide from Stormy Ray's quote
right.
And just
that the voters saw.
Put this in context, there's certain prohibitionists throughout Oregon that like to say, oh, no, it was only going to be a handful. That's what you... And right. That was never said. That's what they keep repeating. And they think if they repeat it often enough that it'll change history.
Yeah, well, and that's true. Sometimes you repeat something enough.
Which is why we need to keep countering it, though.
Right.
It was never.
Well, and then I pointed out to her, because the other thing that she wanted to go into is like, oh, it's pain, that whole thing. There's a lot of people in pain. I'm like, yeah. I go, you're absolutely right. I go, what do you think the number one symptom or sign is of disease or disorder?
Right.
And she looked at me with these, and and she's very nice, but, these are questions that she wasn't dumb. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just not, unless you're aware, or you think about these things, she never even thought about
Russ's quote on his signature line in his email is always, it's exactly what it is. Mm-hmm. People aren't dumb, but it's, how does that go? Only the people who don't use marijuana?
The most amazing thing about cannabis is its ability to addle the brains of the people who do not use it.
Mm-hmm. Bingo.
Right.
And that's so true. And it's because the people that don't use it, I mean, they're so confused. And it's not that they're dumb. It's that they've never gone progressively far enough through this thought process.
Right. And unless
to actually
you lead them down
it.
that. And part of that is that she's not in this movement. Mm-hmm. She doesn't use cannabis. She had no idea about any of... different ways to use it, different situations and things like that. And so, one of the things I said to her is I said, there's people that the problem with medical is that it'll only get us so far. And I go, and it's very, very limited in its protection rights. Mm-hmm. I said, for example, you can still lose your job, you still lose your children.
Right.
And I pointed out that I thought it was very interesting that the Department of Human Services, same department that will remove your children, is the one in Oregon that
oversees the program.
Oversees the program. Like, how hypocritical is that? And then they also jacked up the fees.
Well, and the greatest majority of the average Joe citizen that's not involved in the movement believes that medical marijuana is identical to like Oxycontin or Xanax, that you're getting a prescription, that it's filled through a pharmacy, that you're proper and legal and that you're protected and that they can't come into your home. And they think this. They're not aware of everything that's going on.
Right.
That's not how it works.
Right.
That is how it's supposed to work.
Right.
But that's not how it works.
Well, and I have to, and I said it always puts me in a tenuous position because I have to explain to people what their rights are and what their rights aren't. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people are blown away that they can't just, that if they have their medicine in their car seat next to them, that if they get pulled over, it's not any different than an open container. And
it's a matter of enforcement too,
right,
because we don't have a lot of precedents for how these laws that, especially when you change a law, like the medical marijuana law. Now it's been here 13, almost 14 years now. But when you change a law, the way that it interacts with other laws is a whole new arena. We don't know how it's going to be evaluated.
Right.
It's a funny thing about law, though. That's kind of what I was saying earlier, is that we think that the law says one thing, even like while we're crafting it and putting it through, whether you're a congressman or a citizen, and then the courts decide how they want to interpret it.
Can I give you a perfect crystal example of that we did on the show today, just to break in for a second here?
That would be awesome, because I missed the show today.
was the fact that in our first few medical marijuana states, we put in that employers need not accommodate the use of medical marijuana in the workplace. And we all thought, well, of course, you can't smoke marijuana while you're at work.
Right.
But the courts interpreted it as, if you smoked marijuana at home and there's metabolites in your pee, and that's a condition of being able to work, and we don't have to accommodate that, then we can still discriminate against you for pee tests. There's a perfect example.
Right. And the law, it's always like that. It's always like that.
Well, one of the things I pointed out to her, I explained to her that medical only gets us so far because there's not going to be enough people that would could benefit
under the current paradigm, at least.
And then and then I said, and then there's going to be people who just, to qualify, you have to have a medical examination in the state of Oregon. So if you're too sick to come to that medical evaluation, then you're too sick to qualify.
Right.
And exactly. So then what? Hospice. This is hospice. Or, these are sick and dying. And this is what the intention of it was. So even for the intentions, of the program to be compassionate for the most frail and vulnerable amongst the sick, they can't have access because if that hospice doctor is not willing to write that recommendation, then what?
Well, and I like to point out the cancer patients being the most obvious. I love when the people opposed to medical marijuana or legalization, they get up there and they're like, "You told us it'd be cancer patients. Where's all the cancer patients?" And they don't have time to qualify. I'm like, dead? They didn't have time to grow an entire harvest out, dry it, cure
waiting
it.
to find safe access,
Right.
Waiting to find, for a crop to come due, waiting. That's what they're doing. They're waiting, and meanwhile they're dying. And that's what this program was supposed to protect. So even the medical marijuana programs are not doing that. The other part of that is, I pointed out to her, I said the silliness of this is that they're paying a lot of money to jump through hoops just for some legal protection,
but it's
not much. It's very
the sum is very limited.
Exactly, and I said you could still lose your job, still lose your house, still lose your children, still lose your
be arrested
everything.
if you
still
don't follow these very specific details.
Exactly, and I pointed out if you step outside the boundaries of even a part of it, you're not protected by any of it.
Right.
So it's all or nothing deal. And I said, and there's a lot of people, and I call them activists, willing to, as long as they're not taking advantage of somebody else, like a lot of these farmers markets, dispensaries, whatever you want to call them, they are activists. They're taking a huge risk. I can't even imagine the stress that they're under. But what they provide is important because not everybody wants to grow. Not everybody wants or has the means.
And like I said, the courts are the ones that interpret it ultimately. So you want this to end up into a court. Unfortunately, at somebody's expense, but you do want it to end up in a court for the court to interpret the problems and correct them.
But the question is, if people are willing to jump through these kinds of hoops to be legal, why would we want to perpetuate laws that do the opposite of that? If people are saying, hey, give me some regulation, give me some boundaries, I'm willing to follow them. And guess what? I'm willing to pay you to do that. Won't you just... Why can't you grant me that? Doesn't it make more sense than putting stalking people in prison?
Well, coming from a state that wasn't medical, going to a state that has, been medical for 15 years or so.
Very strange freedom, sense of freedom.
Yeah, and at the same time, that fear is gone. I can drive down the street, go into a building, pick up my medicine, get back out, get in my car, and have a cop drive by and not have my heart beating 1,000,000 times a minute.
Oh, my son.
It's, we want that safe access.
Right.
We want that ability to go get
I want to be able to go and do that.
We should probably cut to a break. We can chat a little bit more about this when we come back. We're going to be coming back with the Normal Women's Alliance, Nicole Elinoff. And just a minute, we'll be right back. You're listening to A Different View.
Busted in Laredo, but for reasons that I'd rather not disclose.
I smoke pot, and I like it a lot. Hi, this is Willie Nelson. I learned a long time ago that marijuana is a lot safer to use than alcohol. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the responsible use of marijuana by adults. It's time we stopped arresting and started respecting responsible marijuana smokers in America. And to learn what you can do to help, please contact NORML at www.norml.org or call toll-free at 888-67-NORMAL.
The show was long and we was just sitting there, and we'd come to play and not just for the ride.
Different View is brought to you by the Normal Women's Alliance, a nonpartisan coalition of socially and geographically diverse women who believe that marijuana prohibition is a self-destructive and hypocritical policy that undermines the American family. They bring a contemporary approach to the policy debate and are proudly representing the interests of modern mainstream women who believe in legalizing marijuana.
Welcome back. You're listening to A Different View. Today we have Nicole Elinoff from the Normal Women's Alliance guest today. Nicole, you're there?
Yeah, hi.
Hello. So I was reading your short bio here, and you go to the University of Central Florida. You're a psychology major with a women's studies minor, and you're involved with the National Organization for Women as well as you were formally involved with the Normal there. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. I was the secretary for Normal at UCF for one semester, and I'm currently the secretary for Now at UCF.
And can you tell our listeners a little bit about Now? I'm familiar with them just a little bit, but I know probably a lot of our listeners aren't. And I think it's fascinating the way that you've kind of brought these two subgroups, I guess you'd say, together. So the National Organization for Women, what exactly do they do?
The National Organization for Women is about ending oppression and having equality for everyone. It's not just women that needs equality, it's everyone that needs equality. And I really enjoy tying two...
Oops,
Are you there?
Yeah, hello.
Oh, there you go. Go ahead. Now, we've got you. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. So, yeah, the National Organization for Women is about ending oppression and equality for everyone. And I really enjoy tying both of my passions together, marijuana and feminism, because there's so many intersections. And I really like the Normal Women's
Hold on, Nicole. Are you on a cellular
that.
phone? It sounds like you might have moved a little bit out of range. It was coming in very clear, and it's kind of gone warbly.
Is this better?
This is clear right here. Yeah. It just went a little bit warbly, and we could hear you talking, but not quite make out what you were saying.
Oh, no.
So you said you were bringing your two passions together, the equality, and then we kind of were losing you into that.
Yeah, feminism and marijuana are two of my passions, and the Normal Women's Alliance really facilitates those two passions together.
Yeah, definitely. And so you said that you're working with the National Organization of Women to sort of bring that prohibition issue in. What exactly is going on there with that?
Right now, I am working on a resolution to present at National Organization for Women Conference in June. The resolution, I want to discuss legalization because the National Organization for Women is supposed to protect all women, and that includes marijuana patients. And I didn't want to discuss medicalization of marijuana because I wanted it to be more broad and have legalization because not every cannabis user is a patient.
Correct.
Right. Definitely. Well, that's awesome. I definitely appreciate that work. Definitely keep us posted on how that's going. And then
definitely.
And so you have a women's studies minor. Tell me a little bit about the role that you feel women play in reforming these laws nationwide. Like, tell me how you feel women play into this, I guess.
Well, I feel that women are a huge role of this movement. We are 51% of the population, and we definitely make things happen. It's just that I feel that marijuana is stigmatized, and it's a very, white male kind of thing, and by breaking barriers and educating more people, we can have more open discussion about marijuana with everyone, not just men, and have it open to women as well.
Do you think that that a lot of women that are against legalization, at least in the polls, do you think that they do that as because of the stigma tied to it, that they necessarily aren't against marijuana but are afraid more of the stigma? Or do you think that women are actually against marijuana because of society's perceptions? What do you think?
I think that a huge part of the reason why they voted is the stigma, because there's a lot at stake for women who are in high support of marijuana. Like, their children could be taken away, they could lose their jobs, especially in education. And just in general, they don't like being vocal about it because they're afraid that they'll be marginalized.
Yeah.
Well, I also think there's a fair amount of professional women who use cannabis for personal reasons, not just medical, but personal reasons, that also have a lot to risk there. There's, if they're self-employed, there's clients, there's image, and that sort of thing. If they work in the corporate world or in any other, form of the public sector, they fight their own form of discrimination there, even with constant drug tests and that sort of thing. So I applaud you for going and trying to marriage the National Organization for Women and the cannabis movement together, because I think that more and more women are starting to see how it affects them without them being a cannabis consumer. I mean, if your child can be taken away just for being a patient for medical marijuana, then your child could be taken away for anything, because you're supposed to have some legal protections. Sorry.
Right.
And
go
ahead. Go ahead. That's all right. Go ahead.
I also feel that it's like a lot of women are against not against marijuana, but not advocates for it, because they have a hard enough time breaking the glass ceiling. Right. Let alone fighting for their medicine in addition to that.
Exactly. And and if it's, and then they have childcare issues to deal with. And if, a lot of parents today swap, they do a lot of childcare swapping, and that's a little hard to do, to invite somebody into your home, to watch your children or to watch their children if you're a cannabis consumer, because, what if runs through your mind, and who would want to be watching somebody else's children, if the DEA were going to break down your door, which we know that's happened, that how hard would that be? I mean,
it's scary. It's really scary.
Well, and I think that there's a lot of women in that childbearing years that kind of move away from the movement for that very reason. And, bringing them back in and telling them why they need to be included. I don't know if it's just because they don't want to have the conversation with their children, or if it is just that fear, or both.
I actually had a lady today, as I was walking around talking to people, about the petition that we're doing here in Oregon. And the lady, she was sweet as pie, but she goes, yeah, I don't talk about those issues in front of my children, and walked away. And I was like, oh, but your child needs to, you know what I mean? Like, this is political.
Right.
I understand why some people are reluctant, but yeah.
I think a lot of it has to do,
these
again, with
children
what
need to learn.
What you were saying about the reporter, and we get it from doctors, in hospice, who don't want to sign a recommendation for a dying patient because they're afraid, because of what they don't understand. And it's because we understand it a lot more that we get it.
Become less fearful, more angry. Yeah.
We're angry,
Go ahead, Nicole, what were you saying? Sorry.
Well, the children also need to know about it, because there's so much propaganda on television about, like, just say no, marijuana's bad.
Right, it's brought into the classroom.
Right. When a lot of, rates of marijuana uses in high school and in college, and people need to learn about the awesome effects of marijuana and not the terrible harms it causes, and also knowing your rights, because that's really important.
Really important, yes.
Well, I guess, I think at the basis of a lot of the, reasons why people are resistant to discuss or to get involved in the conversation about prohibition, it seems like it is fear. For whatever reason, there's a personal fear there, and I understand that, and that's why I always try to take every opportunity that I can to educate somebody as much as I possibly can, and challenge those stereotypical ideas and those cultural, issues that people are uncomfortable with, because I guess that's our responsibility. So, good on you for working with these two organizations, because I think they're both going to be now it's powerful,
bridges, but the bridges between all of it's the one thing that I think is so amazing about all of the different groups is reaching out in the way that you're doing, Nicole, and bringing together these common issues, finding the common ground. So definitely awesome work doing that. And
we'll get ERA passed.
Thank you.
And thank you for coming on to talk to us. We're going to go to a break here.
Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you for being on.
Right.
And, that was our Normal Women's Alliance guest, and you can find out more about the Normal Women's Alliance at normal.org/women. Is that right? And then we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk with Alison Holcomb from Washington about the legalization initiative up there. You're listening to A Different View.
I have to make a confession. I found me love. Can you tell because of my expression? I found me love. Don't be shy, little girl. You got to try, a little love. One love, baby, one love. One love, baby, one love. I love it when you're feeling lovely. Come get you some. Touch me and you rub me lovely. Now kiss a hug. Don't be shy, little girl. Oh yeah, you got to try, a little love. One love, baby, one love. One love, baby, one love. You don't have to worry about love.
The law offices of Omar Figueroa would like to remind you to stand up for your rights. Please do not give up your precious liberties. There's nothing wrong with standing up for our constitutional rights, and in fact, it's the only way to honor the Constitution that recognizes our natural rights. Treat law enforcement with respect and respect the Constitution by standing up for your rights. If you are detained or arrested, stand up for your rights by repeating, "I respectfully invoke all my legal and constitutional rights. I do not consent to any search and seizure. I want to remain silent, and I want to speak to my attorney, Omar Figueroa." Omar Figueroa has more than a decade of experience in federal and California courts and graduated from Yale University, Stanford Law School, and Trial Lawyers College. Please contact the law offices of Omar Figueroa at 415-489-0420 or 707-829-0215, or on the web at www.omarfigueroa.com.
I think God smokes weed, and he was high when he made me. I can feel it in my DNA. I think God smokes weed, and he was high when he made me. And I think he gave up halfway. Complete as I understand. God was making a mess of the man he planned. In the face of defeat, he smoked a helping hand and said, "I'll just put him in a reggae band." I feel it in the beat when I'm on the stand. I feel it in my feet when I'm on the sand. I see it in the sunsets that might expand into your mind so you understand. I think God smokes weed, and he was high.
Welcome back. You're listening to A Different View. We're going to have Alison Holcomb on here. She is the backer or the chief petitioner of the Initiative 502 up in Washington, which is the legalization initiative there. And she's working with the ACLU for quite a few years, and she's on the line now, I believe. Allison, we got you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hi, Allison.
Hi.
What is your title with the ACLU?
I'm the drug policy director at the ACLU of Washington.
Thank you. I didn't want to say it wrong. And are you the chief petitioner, co-chief petitioner with the I-502 initiative?
I'm actually one of 10 sponsors, but I was probably, I guess it'd be accurate to say I was one of the primary drafters of the initiative text itself.
Thank you. And so we wanted to talk to you about a couple of different things, and because this is such an important issue and coming up in Washington, we're going to have you on for 2 segments. So this first segment, we wanted to talk a little bit about the strategy of the initiative. One of the biggest things that I think that it is a point of contention for some pro-cannabis advocates is the DUID provisions. So if you could just explain to me a little bit about what the DUID provisions in I-502 are, and then talk a little bit about how you guys came to determine to do it in the way that it's being done.
Right. So Washington state law on DUIs provides an implied consent. We have an implied consent law, which is different from Oregon. Here in Washington, it's been the case for a few decades now that if an officer has probable cause to arrest you, reasonable evidence that you're impaired, and then further has reasonable evidence that that impairment is caused by something other than alcohol, so caused by some other substance, the officer can take you in and request a blood draw. That's been the case for several years now.
And the presumed consent means that you can't say, no, I'm not doing this, right?
Well, right. I mean, you can say that. If the officer has met all of those procedural requirements and you refuse, if you don't consent, then you automatically forfeit your driver's license.
Ooh. Yeah.
Time. Right. So so you're implied, you can still refuse, but that would be the consequence if you refused. And then the officer could still get a search warrant and require you to submit to that test. So that's the law as it is now. What I-502 does is it now introduces a per se standard for active THC that legally is equivalent to the 0.08 BAC for alcohol. And I say legally because I know that there's a lot of contentiousness about whether or not, scientifically it's the same. But it's supposed to operate legally in the same way. In other words, assuming that the officer passes all those procedural requirements and takes the blood draw, that blood test comes back to the prosecutor. If the prosecutor sees that you're at 5 nanograms per milliliter of active THC in whole blood or higher, then the prosecutor knows that he or she now has an independent basis for finding you guilty of DUI in the same way that he or she could take you to trial on a 0.08 and say, regardless of all the observations of impairment, I got this 0.08 test and this says that this person is guilty of DUI.
So I guess where the trickiness comes in, and you kind of alluded to it a minute ago with the question about whether or not it was scientific. Why 5? Why not 2 or 7? Or why? How did you guys come to choose 5 nanograms as it's what would be politically beneficial to? You know what I mean? Was there a discussion about different levels?
Yes, and you've sort of touched on both of the key points there in your question. There's the science and there's the politics. So I'll start with the politics. The politics that we looked at were what happened with Proposition 19 in California, and also where are Washington state voters on this issue. When we looked at some panel-backed surveys that were done of California voters after the vote on Proposition 19, what we learned was that besides the general objection to marijuana legalization, the number one reason why voters who were soft yeses switched to no, or why the soft no stayed no's, were because there was nothing in Proposition 19 that addressed voters' concerns about drugged driving. Probably just from a kind of a review of the mainstream media right now, we're aware that there is a drive to really bring a lot of attention to the issue about impaired driving, being impaired by substances other than alcohol. So we were concerned about that what we had seen with Proposition 19. And then when we also looked at our public opinion research for Washington voters, what we found is that when thinking about whether or not voters are willing to move from the current prohibition regime to a regulatory scheme, it was very important to them that there be some provision in there that was akin to what they're familiar with alcohol. There's a 0.08 for alcohol. We want some sort of guideline like that. Okay, so those are the political considerations. And I'll just say from the Washington State public opinion research that what we discovered is that if we asked voters, would you be more likely to vote for a legalization measure if it included something like what we have for alcohol? 62% of voters said they would be more likely. 11% said less likely. So there was a net gain of 51% in support if we included this provision. Okay, so those are the political considerations. Then we turned to the science and we said, okay, if we're going to include a per se standard, which is, you know, a difficult decision to make, what would be reasonable? Right now there are 14 states that have per se THC DUI laws. 11 of those are zero tolerance. 2 of those, Nevada and Ohio, use the 2 nanograms. And then Idaho uses 50 nanograms of any metabolite like carboxy-THC in urine. None of those are scientifically supported. The peer-reviewed science that we have available now says that the risk that a driver will be involved in a vehicle accident increases once they hit 5 nanograms and go above that. Below that, they're at no greater risk than a sober driver. And in fact, there's actually a dip in risk so that people that are below 5 nanograms might actually be a little less likely to be involved in an accident than someone that's completely sober. And that's, I think, you know, supported by some of the studies that look at the fact that drivers seem to compensate for the sense that they have had marijuana and they sort of drive more slowly and are more careful. But once you get to that 5 nanograms, the peer-reviewed science that we have available to us now says that your risk of being involved in an accident goes up. At the same time that we agreed that we could include a 5 nanogram standard, though, we also made sure that portions of the tax revenues that we're going to get from regulating marijuana would be dedicated to additional follow-up research on this very issue about the impact of THC on impairment, so that if changes need to be made, that they can be, and that will be facilitated by additional science.
And so let's say that they do that science and they determine that the current law is ineffective. Is it statutorily in there that it will be changed based on these studies, or are these studies more exploratory?
There's nothing in the initiative that says that the standards have to change, but I think that the fact that both Representative Mary Lou Dickerson and Senator Jeannie Cole Wells this year, even before I-502 had even passed, they both introduced legislation in the Washington State Legislature that would have exempted medical marijuana patients from that per se standard. In other words, in order for a medical marijuana patient to have been found guilty of DUI, there would have had to have been additional evidence of impairment, that the blood test would not be sufficient. And I think that what that demonstrates is that there's certainly a political will within the Washington State Legislature to make appropriate adjustments, and additional science is only going to increase that political will.
And let me ask you a question from our chat room that you just kind of almost touched on with the patient idea. Is there, if you have a religious objection against having blood withdrawn, how do the DUIDs or the DUI laws today impact people with a religious objection to blood draws, or after? Is there any differences for those people? Like some faiths, have that.
Of course, yeah. I am not aware of any case law that has examined that issue, and folks should be aware that the blood test is not just for marijuana. Again, this blood test has been in the Washington state law for decades now, and this is what's
new.
Right.
No, it's not new, and this is what's used to charge you with DUI if you've got a prescription for OxyContin, if they suspect you of being on meth, if any drug, whether legal or illegal, they take a blood test. inaccurate reading. And so I'm not aware of a religious exemption for that.
But Alison, let's to be clear, before they can even request the blood test or a urine test, there still has to be suspicion or proof of impairment, correct?
That's right. There's
and that's not going to change if 502 passes, right?
At all, no.
Okay.
And so if that evidence is not there, if they don't have probable cause to arrest you, if they don't have reasonable evidence of impairment, your defense attorney can bring a motion to the court to have the blood test thrown out because the officer did not meet the procedural requirements for taking your blood draw.
And if you don't consent to that blood draw, they still have to go get a warrant to obtain your blood, correct?
Correct. And sometimes they don't do that. Sometimes they don't take that additional step, and they instead go to trial and simply argue, well, the person refused the blood test. So you, jury, can draw your own conclusions from the fact that they refused the blood test.
So really putting the DUID provision in the language is really not necessarily to make something new, but to basically draw attention to something that already exists, but also to satisfy those individuals, not necessarily cannabis consumers, those of us who know, the facts, but for those individuals who aren't cannabis consumers, so they had some sort of basis of understanding impairment in their in their view. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And actually, you raise a really good issue there. Right now, when somebody is charged with a marijuana DUI and they go in front of a jury, juries have absolutely no guideline to understand anything about impairment. And right now, none of us, I don't think any of us who consume alcohol really knows the moment at which we pass 0.08, right? We have a general rule of thumb. It's like, drink, one alcoholic beverage an hour, that sort of thing. And what happens with an alcohol DUI prosecution is that the prosecutor has this result from the breathalyzer. If the breathalyzer comes back at 0.04, for example, jurors kind of have the sense that, that's below the 0.08 that I'm familiar with, so maybe I ought to look at this case a little more closely to see if there's really evidence that this person was driving impaired. With marijuana right now, there's nothing like that. And so a jury just hears from the state toxicologist, this person had 1.6 nanograms of THC in their blood, and they were impaired.
And then the assumption goes from there.
Yeah, exactly. The assumption kind of cuts against the defendant.
Right.
Alison, we have to take a quick break,
Sure.
but please come back and stay with us. We want to continue the conversation.
Talk a little bit about how it affects patients,
Sure.
You're listening to A Different View. We'll be right back.
You feel like you just can't stop moving, overcome by percussion and the groove. Catch a fire, got to keep on moving. This ultra music, yeah. Whoa, let the music transport you. Ooh, yeah. Whoa.
I'm a doctor. I'm a lawyer. I'm a journalist.
I'm a student.
I'm a teacher.
I'm a representative.
I have cancer.
The outdated laws of prohibition are more dangerous than the plant itself.
I lost my scholarship.
I was fired.
20 million arrests since 1965. This is getting ridiculous.
Our prisons are overcrowded with non-violent offenders.
We have the opportunity to change.
This is costing our country billions of dollars.
Making my family and I fight in a courtroom is difficult enough when I'm already fighting through chemotherapy.
There's no reason to be scared by tradition anymore.
We can stop this.
We can stop this.
We are the American people.
We can stop this.
And you have our support.
We're old,
young,
straight,
gay.
We're every race and nationality.
And we're not going to give up.
You can tax it.
You can regulate it.
Apply age restrictions.
You can create millions of new jobs.
We can save our economy.
President Obama?
It's time for legalization.
Legalization.
Yes.
We
can.
Don't be no fool, brother. Some girls are crazy. You work 3 jobs and she still calls you lazy. Don't be no fool, bro. Some girls are crazy. She's got a way to make that fine line so hazy. A little back, I met a girl. She's like a jewel. But in time I come to realize she's not that cool. She soul. When it rains, she just loses control. In her mind, a maniacal role, she digs her own home. Don't be no fool, brother. Some girls are crazy. You work 3 jobs and she still calls you lazy. Don't be no fool, bro. Some girls are crazy. She's got a way to make that fine.
Welcome back. You're listening to A Different View. We've been talking with Alison Holcomb up from Washington, working with the I-502 legalization initiative. And we've spent a little bit of time talking about the DUID provision and the strategy behind that. And I just wanted to ask just a really quick question, and then I wanted to move on to how it affects patients. But I had kind of pointed out the irony when we had Don Skacki on about how this does not allow for home grows, but then outlaws marijuana, driving while using marijuana, which are both logical. But is there some irony in that?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, right.
I mean, it just kind of struck me funny, I guess. So I was just wondering, like, the strategy for that. I understand people not wanting to grow in their own backyard, but if you have to go pick it up.
Right. So the reason why it's not necessarily as ironic as it might seem as first thought is that we're not legalizing coffee shops, for example. So the places that will be selling cannabis to adult users it's package sales only. It's like we used to have a state monopoly on liquor here in Washington up until last November, and you could go to a liquor store and buy a package of vodka, but you couldn't consume it on premises. So we won't be allowing the sale of marijuana in places where you can consume on premises, like a bar or anything like that. So you have to go pick it up, take it home. And so presumably this is going to be package purchases that you then take home and use in the privacy of your own home or at your friend's home or something like that.
Okay, so what about the people who, in order for them to leave their house, they have to consume cannabis in order for them to drive anywhere or go anywhere and do their grocery shopping?
That's the assumption, is if they medicate while they're at home and then they get in their car and they're
right, but impairment and medicating people who take Vicodin.
Let's bring this back around to Alison, because that's kind of where we were going with this next segment, which we're a little bit running late for. So we're only going to have about 4 or 5 minutes to talk about this. But for medical marijuana patients, both the pros and the cons of I-502, I saw some concerns that it would require that all medical growers get a license. And I don't know if that's an accurate assessment or not. And it's also not. How it might affect people with like hospice or, things like that, maybe not qualifying conditions under the current law, how this could broaden the idea of medical marijuana by having a legal market out there.
Right. So first thing, it does not impact at all any patient's ability to grow for him or herself or for a designated provider to do. The only people that are required to get a license are people that want to go into business selling cannabis to whomever is 21 and older.
Okay.
That's a liquor store.
At all. Yeah, it doesn't touch the medical marijuana law. It's only about commercial sales. And so for hospice people, yes, this is important, because what you're doing here is you are talking about taking away the fear of cannabis, because this is going to be something that's going to be available to adults 21 and over, whether you are a patient or not, whether you're someone who wants to use cannabis in the health supporting way, like somebody might recommend to you to have a glass of red wine, right? I mean, there's a broadening of the idea of the appropriate use of cannabis simply because we're removing some of the reefer madness that has plagued the idea of what cannabis is in our society.
And it's interesting you should talk about the hospice patient, because I was pointing out earlier that we were contacted by a caregiver for a hospice patient, and that hospice patient was bedridden, and they wanted salve. That's all they wanted, was just some salve to make this individual comfortable. And in order to get a recommendation in Oregon, you actually have to come in physically, or hope the doctor will make a house call, because the physicians at the hospice center were unwilling to sign a recommendation. So in this case, it removes that hassle and that hurdle. And then, it also makes it more readily available for that individual. So they're not waiting for a state to recommend them or for a doctor, to provide them with the recommendation.
And not just an ounce of that salve, but 16 ounces.
And the one other thing that I always like to point out to people, like when I'm talking about it down here, and I presume this is true up in Washington with the way that your initiative is structured as well, is that people always talk out against smoking marijuana. And I think that with a legal market, we create healthier ways of using marijuana, because it's really true that the smoking is the only, in my experience and education so far, at least, the only studies we have against marijuana refer to the smoking of marijuana, not making it from a tea or a salve or an edible. And I think that we're encouraging better use if we have a legal model. Is that kind of true in this initiative, that it could help people use it in a healthier way as opposed to smoking it? It sounds like it's kind of intended to do that.
Absolutely. I mean, by discussing marijuana-infused products versus simply usable marijuana, which is the dried flowers, you're already kind of suggesting to people that there are other forms in which they can consume cannabis. And not to mention vaporization. There's nothing really in the initiative that talks about that. But just opening up the dialogue about this substance and taking away some of the stigma so that we feel freer to talk to one another about the options, I think is very important. It moves the conversation forward for everybody.
Well, and I know that politics doesn't happen in a vacuum, and that writing these things is a collective process, and it is a lot about strategy. You've been taking what is this saying? I'm cliche. Taking a licking and keep on kicking. Did I say it right? Did I say it right? Close enough. Okay. We hear a lot of the comments throwing the patients under the bus, but this actually provides patients more rights to fight for more rights.
Right, and all politics aside, it's about progress, and
right,
it's about,
not perfection.
There's a group of people sitting there trying to make this progress, and then there are people, everybody else. And I think what matters most is, what does the average citizen want? They want compassion. They want to help people, but at the same time, they don't want to see people thrown in jail just because they're not medical patients.
And I don't know if this is putting you on the spot too much to ask, but aside from there are particular elements in the patient community in Washington that have come out very vocally against, your initiative for these concerns. Have you experienced any other groups that are opposed in similar ways, or do you find a lot of support for these provisions outside of those groups?
I think the best thing about running this initiative and being able to have the sponsors behind it that we have is how exciting it is to talk to people that don't use cannabis and that support it. That's exactly what we're trying to do, is to spread the conversation, because all of us know that reforming the laws about cannabis is not about whether you want to use cannabis yourself personally.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
It's the damage that's being done to our society right now, and that's why it's it is true. Take it a look and keep on ticking. Because all of us know, come on, 800,000 arrests a year, 50,000 dead in Mexico.
Well, should our laws be about filling up our prisons or about empowering our communities and our public? It does seem like, at least, discussing it and making it able to be a part of a dinner topic is... I'm stumbling for words.
I was going to say, Alison, thank
you
so much for coming on and talking to us about this. We definitely want to have you on again as we get closer to the election, because I think there's going to be a lot more to talk about. I think the more we talk to the non-cannabis users, the more we discover what those issues are that are at the front of their... In talking to them myself, I think that's the most fascinating thing, too, is to see how people outside of this world view what's going on. And
like it or not, we need their support, and we need to have the conversation at their level, at their interest, and their take on this whole thing, because everybody has a piece of the pie.
So, Alison, we've got less than a minute left. If you want to give us a website real quick for any of our listeners who may want to follow up on the initiative and see how things are going, sign up for your updates, that kind of thing.
Thank you so much. It's www.tnbc.org. New Approach WA. That's newapproachwa.org. And thank you so much for having me on tonight.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. And like I said, closer to November, we're going to want to have you on again. You're listening to A Different View. We're on Mondays at 8 p.m., replays 2 a.m., and I think 8 a.m. See you next Monday. Thanks.